Chapter 1. The security guard at Alpine Foods said they were not expecting Elaine Peterson for her internship in the chocolate department. Gripping her luggage, she crossed the lobby of the Alpine Foods corporate building. The thub-thub-thub from her bag's broken wheel echoed off the wooden panels behind a mahogany reception desk. Well-heeled employees scurried past her, staring at her from the corners of their eyes as if she were dragging in a carcass. Lainey held up her head, hoping the guard was mistaken. She'd spent the last 4 years at Stanford, beaten out 200 other applicants, and flown 1,200 miles across the Atlantic. At the receptionist's desk, she parked her luggage upright and threw her carry-on over the valise.
Pourrais-je vous aider, mademoiselle?
The male receptionist asked, in yaw-yawing Swiss French, eyeing her over the top of the tall desk.
Can I help you?
She began. She fumbled for the right words. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw her carry-on slide. With a jerk, she caught the bag, but the jostle sent several chocolate wrappers to the ground. Without glancing up, she knew the receptionist thought she couldn't keep it together. Not a great first impression. She had to apologize. Désolée. Exasperated, she picked up the wrappers, stuffing them one by one into her pockets. The first chocolate bar she ate as a pre-boarding snack. The second she devoured when they delayed her first flight at Sky Harbor Airport. The third slipped down her gullet when she missed her connection at the Glasgow airport. And of course, the fourth. The fourth she snarfed while she waited for the promised driver to pick her up at the airport in Geneva. When no one showed, she boarded the train to Vevey. She thought she was only late. Now she was freaked out. After picking up the wrappers, she faced the receptionist with the best smile she could manage after a nearly 30-hour transit and very little sleep. He asked her again if she needed help. She understood, but it was as if a plastic bag was suffocating her brain. She deserved a fuzzy head after staying up late with Nadine the night before a 6 a.m. flight, rehashing every detail. What went wrong? Her head throbbed, and she explained in halting French. My name is Elaine Peterson. I'm here for an internship in the chocolate department with Madame Grochet. Her 4 years of university French broke through the fog. From her carry-on, she removed a folder. I have correspondence from Marie-Claire Remonte in Human Resources. It says right here I was supposed to report this morning for orientation. The receptionist arched his brow and clicked a few strokes on the keyboard, then faced her.
There must be some misunderstanding.
His condescension sucked more wind from Lainey's deflated spirits.
Madame Grochet isn't expecting you. She isn't even in today.
What?
I will call Marie-Claire.
He directed her to the seating at his side.
Wait there, please.
Leaving her bag by the desk, she slinked to the high-back, black seats to stare out the glass walls at the lacy snow draping the Alps reflected in Lake Geneva. But even the beautiful scenery couldn't distract her for long. Did Madame Grochet nix her position because she was late? You know Swiss punctuality. 15 minutes early was 5 minutes late. Imagine being 4 hours late. No, she wasn't even in. Something else was amiss. Maybe Lainey mixed up the dates. Europeans write day, month, year, not month, day, year, like Americans. Or she misread the date when she made her flight plans. She breathed in, relieved. Somewhat. She had triple-checked the date. And besides, there was no 26th month. What else could it be? A woman entered the lobby from the panel doors. clacking in impossibly high stiletto boots. Elaine Peterson! So this was Mary Claire. Different than the glossy brochure they sent Lainey. She wore an exaggerated gypsy style rather than office casual. With a slight hand, she brushed a long, crimped strand of dark hair behind her triple-pierced ear. She would be able to straighten this out. "What are you doing here?" she asked in English. Not a good sign. Lainey's stomach dropped. She struggled to respond. Her throat was so dry, it was as if she'd eaten straight cocoa powder. "I'm supposed to report for my internship in the chocolate department today, right?" Mary Claire responded in English. "Mostly." "Désolé. Did they not you contact?" she asked, wide-eyed. Lainey shook her throbbing head, unsure who they were. "Oh la la." She faced the receptionist and spoke rapidly. Judging by the speed and accent of her French, Lainey guessed she wasn't Swiss, probably French. Mary Claire gesticulated and glanced at Lainey. Dread grew in her stomach, leaving a foul taste across her unbrushed teeth. Finally, Mary Claire broke from the receptionist to face Lainey. "There was a telephone call? The 18th? The 18th? Last week? What was she doing the 18th? It was the day before Nadine threw her going-away party. Mary Claire consulted her notes. "We left a message with Nadine Hart?" What? Her best friend received a phone call canceling her internship and didn't tell her? Why? Nadine was so not getting any souvenir chocolate. "C'est dommage. Le département de chocolat cannot you take." Mary Claire's bluntness quickened Lainey's heartbeat. Heat radiated from her face. Her heartbeat pulsed into her head. Her brow lifted off her skull. "Please, don't pass out," she silently prayed. She didn't want to know how hard the granite floor was. "Why not?" "Bad economy, vous voyez," she said. "Their budget was cut dernière minute. There is no money. You have to return home." "But I've come so far." She couldn't return home, not when she was in the lobby, not when she could almost smell the chocolate. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, hoping to stop the train wreck inside her head. All she envisioned was the image of her beaming parents waving goodbye as she bustled through security. What would their expressions be if she returned home tomorrow? "What am I going to do?" she asked. Mary Claire shrugged with a pained expression on her face. Chocolate. Lainey needed chocolate. Her tongue lolled in her mouth, craving a molten blob of chocolatey goodness to soothe her spirits and to calm her heart. But the delayed flights depleted her choco stash. There was nothing left. Zilch. Nada. Rien de tout. Is there somewhere else I can work? Some other department? Some other job? She would mop floors, empty trash cans, anything at Alpine Foods. She didn't say this aloud. It wasn't the best bargaining chip to appear too needy. Maybe she could wander the lobby with a sign around her neck. "Will work for chocolate." Her nose tingled. She sneezed. She always sneezed right before she cried. "Please, I'm willing to do anything." Mary Claire handed her a scented tissue, biting her lip. Her eyebrows peaked with sympathy. She patted Lainey's hands. "Wait, I see what I can do. Maybe one of the other departments can you take?" She lifted the phone at the reception desk, dialed a number, and spoke in such rapid French Lainey couldn't keep up. Lainey bit her lip. Cheer up, Lainey. Lots of things went wrong in foreign travel. At least she had her luggage. She hugged her carry-on to her chest. And she didn't die during the flight. A bit of turbulence, maybe. Okay, she might have wet herself in the bathroom as the plane rocked, but overall it was an uneventful trip across the Atlantic. And Mary Claire was going to see what she could do. There were many things to be grateful for. Her tummy rumbled, reminding her for the umpteenth time that she hadn't eaten much but chocolate in over 24 hours. And did she hear a whistling sound, or were her ears ringing? She swooped her shoulder-length hair behind her ear and rubbed her thighs. They were not rail-thin, more rounded and well-fed. Mary Claire hung up, a huge grin on her face. I sent your CV to Yves Claremont. Yves agrees to give you interview. Her English communication is très bien, better than mine. Madame Claremont will interview her? A nervous shiver filled her horribly stressed body. Just then, the door opened again. Out came a pencil-thin woman in a pencil-lined skirt with pencil-lined eyebrows. Behind her trailed a gorgeous man in a suit, if one could say a man was gorgeous, with dark, serious eyes and angular features. He consulted his phone. Lainey was glad he didn't glance at her. He was the type of guy who would make her blush if he caught her staring at him. Just then, his gaze met hers, an intense, meaningful stare. Blushing, she ignored him giving her a once-over and focused instead on the woman. Legs shaking, gratitude swelling in her heart, Lainey stood and held out her hand. Thank you for taking time to interview me, Madame Claremont. The woman's two big eyes widened in disdain. Lainey might wither right on the granite. Should she have said it in French, not English? Was it rude of her to greet someone in English in a foreign country? The ringing in Lainey's ears grew louder. Voices sounded strangely far away. She was just about to repeat herself in French when the woman eyed the man behind her. In fact, everyone stared at him. Their gazes met. His eyes were even darker than her own chocolate brown, and his eyebrows raised in surprise. I am Yves Claremont, he said in English. In French, Yves sounded like Eve. Heat flashed Lainey's face. The ringing in her ears increased into deafening numbness. Monsieur Claremont's gorgeous features disappeared into darkness. When the blackness faded, she was lying on the cold granite floor. She had a great view of it, very clean, and, as predicted, hard. Someone held her hand, and everyone was speaking French. Throbbing pain nearly overtook her when she tilted her head toward Mary Claire, who patted Lainey's fingers. Her long, crimped hair tickled Lainey, her flowing shirt draped across her midsection. Up this close, a tiny hole was visible in Mary Claire's thin nose. Oh, ma pauvre, she said. Ça va? I'm sorry. Lainey's voice shook. I haven't really eaten much. I must have passed out. And Yves, it sounded like a girl's name. No, Monsieur Claremont. She would only call him Monsieur Claremont, was on the phone, his jaw flexing, his dark eyebrows gathered. She laid her head back down on the granite. At her side, Monsieur Claremont knelt. The scent of his cologne weakened her, in a good way. I'm so sorry. She stared into his concerned face. Mary Claire used the feminine pronoun her before communication in English. I thought she was referring to a woman. She chuckled uncomfortably. His heavily lashed eyes were penetrating, dark and serious. He leaned in and whispered to Lainey, his voice low and soft.
I am very much a man.
A hint of intensity flashed in his eyes, but then it fled, and he was as cold and clipped as ice chips.
Sabine will bring you something to eat while we talk, he said louder in English.
He placed his hand under her shoulder to help her up. His gentle yet firm touch sent electricity through her body.
You must be famished.
His clipped French accent was incredibly sexy. She stopped herself. He might be her new boss. The sugar and caffeine had finally run out. She nodded feebly. Monsieur Claremont directed her to the chair by the wall of windows.
Wait here.
He crossed the lobby to direct Sabine in French. He was not overly tall or short, about 6 feet, she would guess, but lean. He moved with the grace of one who purposefully, consistently worked out. And, Lainey guessed, paid for an expensive barber, judging from the perfect way his dark hair settled in the back. He returned, arranging a chair across from her, occupied with something on his phone.
We'll wait until you have eaten.
His English was hot chocolate to her soul. His voice soothed her and warmed her inside. Within a few moments, Sabine entered the paneled doors with a tray and set it in an empty chair near her with an unmistakable cold stare in Lainey's direction. Wait, a tray? Apparently the Swiss do not go half measures on anything. On this tray sat 2 buttery croissants, sliced pears and peaches in a ceramic cup, a sandwich of thin sliced ham and cheese on a crusty chunk of French bread, and 2 silver blue wrapped pieces of chocolate, all over a lacy doily. A 4-star spread! Shaking loose the real fork, spoon, and butter knife, she spread the cloth napkin on her lap. After sugary slurps of fruit, she started on the sandwich. While chewing, she peeked at Monsieur Claremont. He glanced up from his phone. His eyes slid purposefully to hers. His eyebrows peaked at just the right moment, asking if she was okay. She returned with a half smile. So scrumptious. The sandwich. She was thinking about the sandwich. Another bite. Was it hot? He held out his phone, exposing a designer watch encircling his wrist.
Now you've eaten a little, we can start. I have reviewed your CV. I am ready to see what you can do for our department.
He broke to glance at his phone.
You earned an English degree at Stanford,
French minor.
You worked full-time to support yourself at university.
Tell me about homemade meals. She swiped her mouth to stall, folding the napkin across her lap once more. When she glanced up, his gaze penetrated hers, interested and attentive. For a heart-stopping moment, she was calm. What she learned from homemade meals wasn't something easily explained on a CV. It needed to be shared. She cleared her throat to eject the rising tremors. Homemade Meals is a nonprofit specializing in bringing healthy meals to housebound elderly people in the Bay Area. He raised an eyebrow.
And how did those experiences prepare you for this internship?
Her throat strangled her breath. Everything was riding on this. She struggled to tailor her responses without knowing which department she was applying to. She decided to keep it honest and general. The awesome people at Homemade Meals helped me realize food is a meaningful way of communicating care, nourishing not just the body, but the soul. I learned baking brings me joy, and this is a way to share my talents. Monsieur Claremont smiled curtly, then glanced at his phone again for reference.
Yes, I am sure it's a lovely story. And no doubt you have told it many times.
He lifted his gaze to challenge hers.
And the people you served? Can you tell me something about them? Something aside from being elderly?
The edge in his voice expressed doubt in her sincerity. He thought she'd padded her resume for appearances. But this was a question she had no trouble answering. She sat up straighter. His eyes widened at her confidence. Good. She enjoyed surprising people. First on my route was Lavina. She enjoyed my chocolate cream puffs almost as much as an Oakland A's game. Her son played baseball years ago in high school, and it was all she ever talked about. Then Susan crushed on some soap opera star from the 80s. Nobody I knew, but after searching for reruns online, we discovered they weren't available anymore. She loved my hazel chocolate cookies and cream sandwich cookies. Dipped them in cola. Lainey wrinkled her nose. And Esther still crochets, 90 years old and still crocheting. Made me a scarf and mittens despite her partial blindness. Said she crocheted by touch. She ate 3 helpings of my chocolate chip bread because she said she wanted to die happy. Should I continue? No, thank you. He almost smiled, but cut it short. You were scheduled for the Department of Chocolat. Tell me why. My uncle traveled to Switzerland and, for my 9th birthday, brought me back an Alpine Foods extra milk chocolate bar, the most delicious thing I'd ever tasted. She didn't mention her parents' rocky marriage while her dad's business tanked, or her tween-age strife. Chocolate continued to act as a warm, fuzzy comfort blanket. I want to bring joy to many people. I see. His expression changed to almost a scowl. If I am pleased with your work, I will give you a recommendation for a full-time position to Madame Crochet. So you'll take me? He stood and returned his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. I think you are just what we are looking for. Mary Claire, who had waited at the desk, crossed to them. She asked something in rapid French. He switched over to French flawlessly when he consulted with her. Thankfully, the food regulated her blood sugar and his French became more clear. Yes, we'd love to have her in our department. Now, if you will make the arrangements. There is a matter of her stipend. What matter? During your interview, I checked and you have no money in your budget. Monsieur Claremont did not even miss a beat before answering. Take it out of my salary. He nodded curtly and stalked to the door out of the lobby. Mary Claire glanced at him in exasperation when he slid his card through the security reader. Monsieur Claremont paused before the open door, then faced Lainey. I forgot. Do you have any questions? Lainey answered without hesitation. Which department do I report to? Monsieur Claremont raised his eyebrows. Pet care. Then, before slipping through the door, he said, See you at 7:40 a.m. sharp. Pet care? Pet care. A hint of terror weakened her knees. She swallowed hard. You are lucky to work with Monsieur Claremont. Mary Claire held paperwork in her hands. Everyone wants to intern with him. With her heart still beating and dread growing in her throat, Lainey switched to French, too. How come? She would have to think about pet care later. Because he is the best department chair. He aspires to be the youngest vice president in Alpine Foods history. He is hardworking and ambitious, but also fair and cares as much for the success of his subordinates as his own. Sadly, he gives everything to his ambition and is not much fun. Bracelets jangled when Mary Claire squatted next to Lainey to hand her the paperwork. She frowned. Now, Sabine will find you a temporary apartment.
Housing is limited here and very expensive. You don't have a phone? Mine died right before I came. Ah, and we promised one on arrival. Mary Claire stood. As well as reimbursements for any travel costs. I will get you the necessary forms. After a few minutes, Sabine returned with printed instructions to a temporary furnished apartment. She handed Lainey a clamshell cell phone. This only makes calls within Switzerland, and there is no internet access. Pet care and no internet access? Lainey gulped. No social media? Panic rose in her throat. No, the Swiss have this thing about productivity, Mary Claire muttered before retreating. When Sabine removed the tray, Lainey swiped the 2 wrapped chocolates. Thank you. The meal tasted great. She motioned to the remnants. Was it your lunch? No. Her eyebrows were still furrowed. It was Yves' lunch. She spun without further explanation. Weighing the chocolates in her hand, Lainey pocketed them for later. She stared at the door where they all left. She wished she had thanked him. Yves stalked toward his office. He didn't really need a new intern. What about her made him hire her? He bit his fingernail. Then he remembered he was trying to quit the habit and dropped his hand. Perhaps her sincerity and her situation. He couldn't very well send her back to the States. While Yves was distracted, Luc Pézerot cornered him in the hall. His large forehead gleamed in the overhead fluorescent lights. "Enjoying your new office, department head?" he asked, using formal French to mock Yves and his position. Slipping past him, Yves responded cordially. "Yes, thank you, I am, but I'm not planning on being there long," he continued down the hall. But Luc stopped him again by stepping in front of him. "Already looking for another place to work?" Luc smirked and shoved his hands into his pockets. "Or climbing up the ladder? You just received a promotion last year." Facing him, Yves arched an eyebrow, but said nothing. Abruptly sidestepping him, he continued down the hall. He had no time for Luc. There were people you assist, and there were people who assisted you. Luc was neither of those. His arrogance made him beyond help, and his incompetence made him useless. Luc parted the silence behind Yves. "At some point, you won't succeed on your name alone. Someday you'll misstep, and you'll fail, just like your old man." But Yves ignored him, instead biting his nail to keep him from saying something he'd regret later. Entering his office, he didn't notice his gorgeous view of Lake Geneva sparkling in the sun's touch. Instead, he opened his computer at his desk. What could the new intern do? What was her name? Elaine Peterson. She majored in English, right? He glanced through several unfinished tasks. Guy Mouchet had neglected to write up several brochures. Perfect for someone schooled in writing. But she required training. His schedule prevented him this week. Tomorrow was positively packed, including several phone calls first thing in the morning. He needed someone else. Sabine's large eyeballs beamed on him before he acknowledged her. She haunted his doorway. Perfect. Just the person he wanted to see. "Will you train Mademoiselle Peterson tomorrow in some of our programs? The American intern can input data for analysis and then write advertising pamphlets and marketing campaigns." Sabine cocked her hip and crossed her thin arms. "He was supposed to write those." "Yes, but since he's not doing his job, someone has to." He handed her a stack of folders. "Please give her these." He glanced up. "And be sure to train her on the STS so she will be able to translate when finished." "Of course." "And remind the new intern of the strike tomorrow. I will pick her up on the way into town." As one of the few employees who owned a car, it was his duty to be courteous. She stood at the door facing him. Again, her gaze trained on him. He raised his eyes to her. "Do you need anything else?" "I wanted to invite you to dinner Friday at my house." "Are you having a dinner party?" he asked, distracted. He was answering an email from Mary Claire asking how much she should withdraw to pay for the new American intern. "No, a friendly dinner, just the two of us." After sending the email, Yves blinked a few times with the realization of what the offer intended. He had gathered her not-so-subtle hints indicating her interest before, but he always discouraged her. He hoped her overtures would never become overt. He sighed, clasping his hands in front of him, choosing his words carefully. "Company policy strictly forbids fraternizing. Remember Jean-Claude and Marielle?" "They were sloppy." "They were breaking the rules." "We can be subtle." "Someone always finds out." "Rules are meant to be broken." "Even so, I cannot jeopardize my career, both our careers, for supplementing our relationship." Besides, subtlety was not one of her strengths. "I would take any risk." "Thank you. You are highly complimentary. However, as a diligent employee, it would be a shame for you to throw away years of hard work." He cracked a smile. "I am not worth it." "But you are." "I only care about one thing." Her eyes narrowed. "Work will always come first for you, Yves Claremont. One day you will look back on your life and wish you had not wasted it chasing your ambition." She took his rejection better than he expected. Still, she waited. "You know what you need? You need a heart." Yves raised an eyebrow at her suggestion. Sabine licked her lips. "As a friend, I am warning you to watch Luc. I heard he's threatened to come for you." "I am not worried." "He has powerful friends in executive positions." Yves focused on flipping through the market research before him. How can he win? He can't even organize a decent market analysis report.